I keep going back and forth on this, so I figured I'd just tell the whole story and let other people decide. Because part of me feels like I finally stood up for myself, and another part of me feels like maybe I made a big deal out of nothing. So yeah, I guess my question is, am I overreacting, or was this actually disrespectful? I'm a guy in my mid-20s, and this story is about my friend Jake. We've known each other for years, like years. Same college, same friend group, same hangouts. At one point, I honestly thought this dude was going to be in my life forever. And the thing about Jake is, he's not a bad person. He's funny, he's confident, he's the type of guy who can walk into a room and immediately take over the conversation. And maybe that was the first red flag. At first, I didn't mind it. I'm more laid back. I don't need to be the loudest person in the room. So when Jake talked over me sometimes or cracked jokes at my expense, I brushed it off. That's just how he is, right? That's what everyone said. But over time, it started adding up. Like little things. He'd interrupt me mid-sentence, then later repeat my point like it was his own. He'd joke about my job, my dating life, or how I'm too sensitive, especially in front of other people. And every single time, if I looked uncomfortable, he'd laugh and say, "Bro, relax, I'm kidding." And yeah, I laughed too, because calling it out felt awkward, and I didn't want to be that guy. So I swallowed it. Again, and again, and again. The thing is, when you ignore small stuff long enough, it doesn't stay small. It just stacks. And I didn't even realize how annoyed I was until one night a few months ago. We were at a small get-together, nothing crazy, just some friends, drinks, music playing low in the background. I was telling a story about something stressful that happened at work. Nothing dramatic, just one of those moments where you need to vent. And I remember being mid-sentence when Jake cut me off and said, hold on, let me explain this better." And he literally retold my story. Changed a few details, added jokes, made himself the center of it. Everyone laughed, and I just sat there, quiet. I felt stupid for even opening my mouth. After that, I kinda shut down for the rest of the night. I didn't say much. I just nodded along, scrolled my phone, waited for it to end. On the drive home, I kept replaying it in my head. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just one moment. This was a pattern. Beat. So the next day, I decided I'd say something. Not aggressively, not confrontationally, just honest. I texted him and asked if we could talk. He replied with, "Hello, L, sure, what's up?" That should have prepared me. When we met up, I tried to explain how I felt. I told him I felt talked over sometimes, that his jokes didn't always land the way he thought they did. And before I could even finish, he laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an awkward laugh, a full-on dismissive laugh. And he said, "Dude, you're reading way too much into this." That sentence hit harder than I expected, because it wasn't just disagreement, it was dismissal. I tried again. I said I wasn't attacking him, I just wanted him to be aware. And that's when he said the line that really flipped something in my head. He goes, "Man, if you're this sensitive, that's not on me." Something in me snapped. Not in a yelling way, not in a dramatic way, just clarity. I told him calmly that I wasn't asking him to change who he is. I was asking him to respect me. And he rolled his eyes. That was it. I stood up and said, "Yeah, I think I need some space." And I left. No big speech, no insults, just walked away. I didn't expect what came next. Within a day, mutual friends started messaging me. Jake told them I blew up over nothing, that I was being dramatic, that I couldn't take a joke.
And suddenly, I felt like I was on trial for setting a boundary. That messed with my head, because when enough people say you're overreacting, you start wondering if you are. I replayed every interaction, every joke, every interruption, and I kept asking myself, why did I wait this long to say something? Here's the part that really gets me. A few days later, Jake texted me again. No apology, no acknowledgement, just, bro, this is stupid, let's just move on. And for a second, I almost did, because moving on is easier than addressing things. Silence feels peaceful at first, but then I imagined going back to the same dynamic. Me biting my tongue, me laughing things off, me shrinking so someone else could feel bigger. And I realized I didn't want that anymore. So I replied, I don't think I can just move on like nothing happened. He never responded. It's been weeks now. Some friends get it, some don't. Jake and I don't talk anymore. And honestly, I miss who I thought he was, but I don't miss how I felt around him. I've learned that disrespect doesn't always look loud or obvious. Sometimes it hides behind jokes. Sometimes it hides behind confidence. And sometimes you don't realize you're being disrespected until you finally speak up and someone shows you exactly how little your feelings matter. So yeah, that's the story. I didn't scream, I didn't insult him, I didn't try to turn people against him. I just chose distance. And I'm still asking myself, was I overreacting or was that actually disrespectful? I never thought I'd be the type of person to cut someone off. Like, fully. No texts, no checking in, no happy birthday messages out of guilt. But here I am, and I honestly don't know if I did the right thing. So, yeah, am I the asshole for finally cutting off my best friend? We met when we were kids. Same neighborhood, same school, same everything. Let's call him Ryan. Ryan and I were inseparable growing up. Sleepovers, video games, dumb inside jokes that made zero sense to anyone else. He was the person I called when something good happened and when something went wrong. For a long time, I thought that kind of history meant loyalty no matter what. Turns out, that's not always true. As we got older, things slowly shifted. Nothing dramatic at first, just uneven. I started noticing that I was always the one reaching out, always the one adjusting my schedule, always the one saying, it's cool, when plans fell apart last minute. Ryan, on the other hand, was busy. Busy with work, busy with relationships, busy with new friends. And look, I get it, life happens, but effort matters. Whenever I brought it up, he'd say things like, bro, you know I'm bad at texting, or don't be so serious, we're good. So I backed off. Then I felt guilty for backing off, so I reached out again. This cycle went on for years. Here's where it gets messy. Ryan had this habit of only showing up when he needed something. A ride, a favor, someone to vent to. And every time I was there, because that's what best friends do, right? But when I needed support, he'd take days to respond, sometimes weeks. And when he did respond, it was surface level, quick, distracted, like he was half listening. The breaking point didn't come from one big betrayal. It came from exhaustion. I remember this one night really clearly. I'd had a rough week, like genuinely rough. Work stress, family stuff, just one of those weeks where everything piles up. So I called him. Straight to voicemail. No big deal. I texted, hey man, could really use a call tonight. He read it, didn't respond. Later that night, I saw him post stories hanging out with friends, laughing, drinking, having a great time. And something in my chest just sank. Not because he was having fun, but because he saw me asking for help and chose not to answer. Long pause. The next day, he texted, "Sorry, bro, got busy." That was it. No follow-up, no "you okay?" no "wanna talk now?" And I realized something uncomfortable. If I stopped reaching out, this friendship would disappear. So I tested it. Beat. I didn't text, didn't call. Days passed, then weeks. Nothing. No check-in, no "yo, you alive?" It hurt way more than I expected. Soft pause. Eventually, he did reach out. Not to ask how I was, but to ask for a favor. That's when I snapped. Not outwardly, not angrily, internally. Long pause. I replied politely that I couldn't help this time. He sent a "damn okay" and went quiet again. And something clicked. I wasn't a friend. I was a convenience. Beat. A few weeks later, we ran into each other at a mutual friend's place. Everything was awkward. He joked like nothing was wrong, acted casual. At one point, he laughed and said, "You've been ghosting me lately." I looked at him and said calmly, "I stopped chasing." The room went quiet for a second. He laughed it off, but I could tell it hit.
After that night, I decided to have an actual conversation. No hints, no passive stuff, just honesty. I told him I felt taken for granted, that the friendship felt one-sided, that I was tired of being there for someone who wasn't there for me. He listened, and then he said something that I still think about. He said, "I didn't realize you expected so much from me." Expected so much? All I wanted was effort. That's when I knew we weren't on the same page. He wasn't being malicious, he just didn't value the friendship the same way I did. And you can't force someone to care. After that talk, things didn't improve. If anything, they felt more distant. And that's when I made the decision. I stopped reaching out completely. No announcement, no dramatic goodbye. I just let it end. Months passed. At first, it felt peaceful. Then it felt lonely. I questioned myself constantly. Was I being dramatic? Was I expecting too much? Was I throwing away years of friendship over hurt feelings? Especially when mutual friends would say things like, "That's just how he is," or "You know he doesn't mean anything by it." But here's what nobody talks about. Intent doesn't erase impact, and being low effort still hurts the person on the receiving end. Recently, Ryan messaged me out of nowhere. Just a casual, "Yo, long time." No acknowledgement, no reflection, just pretending nothing happened. And I stared at that message for a long time because part of me missed him, missed the memories, missed who he used to be. But I also remembered how small I felt toward the end, how anxious I got waiting for replies, how often I made excuses for him. And I realized something important. I didn't miss him. I missed the idea of him. So I didn't respond. And that silence felt heavier than anything I'd done before. Now I'm sitting here, months later, with fewer friends but more peace. And I still don't know if I did the right thing. All I know is this. Friendships shouldn't feel like negotiations. They shouldn't make you question your worth. And they definitely shouldn't only exist when you're useful. So yeah, that's the story. I didn't cut him off because I was angry. I cut him off because I was tired. Tired of hoping, tired of waiting, tired of feeling optional. And I guess what I'm really asking is, am I ATA for finally cutting off my best friend, or was it overdue?
I already know how this sounds. I can hear it in my head before anyone even says it. You knew better. The signs are right there. Why didn't you just leave? And honestly, yeah, you're not wrong. But sometimes knowing something and accepting it are two completely different things. So, yeah, this is a story of how I ignored every red flag, because I didn't want to be alone. I am a guy in my mid-20s, and for most of my life, I've been pretty independent. I've always had friends, hobbies, work, all that. But I've also always had this quiet fear of ending up alone. Not in a dramatic way, just this constant background thought that maybe everyone else was moving forward and I was somehow falling behind. That's where she comes in. I'll call her Emily. We met through mutual friends, and at first, everything felt easy. She was funny, sarcastic, confident, the kind of person who could talk to anyone. And she liked me. That alone felt huge. The early days were great. Late night conversations, long walks, that feeling where your phone lights up and your mood instantly changes. But even then, there were signs. Little ones. She'd get annoyed if I didn't respond fast enough. She'd joke about testing me. She'd casually bring up her exes in weirdly competitive ways. I noticed. I just didn't want to care. I told myself it was just insecurity, that everyone has baggage, that relationships take compromise. So I ignored it. Over time, the red flags stopped being subtle. She started checking my phone as a joke. She'd ask who I was texting and why. If I went out with friends, she'd get distant afterward. Not angry, just cold. And I'd end up apologizing, even when I didn't know what I did wrong. Looking back, I think the worst part was how slowly it happened. Nothing exploded overnight. It was more like a constant drip. A comment here, a look there, silence instead of communication. And every time I felt uncomfortable, I'd think, at least I'm not alone. Beat. There was one night that really stands out. I was hanging out with some friends, nothing wild, just chilling. I texted her to let her know. She replied with, "Oh, have fun." Which, if you know, you know. Pause. The entire night, my phone stayed quiet. No texts, no check-ins. And instead of enjoying myself, I spent the whole night anxious, wondering what mood she'd be in later. That should have been my wake-up call. It wasn't. So, instead, I went back to her place afterward and apologized for not communicating enough. She accepted the apology like she was doing me a favor, and I let her. Beat. Here's something I didn't realize at the time. I wasn't afraid of losing her. I was afraid of going back to an empty routine. No goodnight texts, no one to share random thoughts with, no feeling of being chosen. So I stayed. As months went by, I started shrinking. I stopped bringing up things that bothered me, stopped disagreeing, stopped trusting my own instincts, because every time I tried to talk things out, it somehow turned into my fault. You're overthinking. You're too sensitive. You always make things a bigger deal than they are. And I believed her. Beat. My friends noticed before I did. They'd ask why I was always stressed, why I canceled plans so often, why I looked tired all the time. I'd laugh it off. She just cares a lot. It's complicated. It's fine. It wasn't fine.
The moment that finally cracked something in me wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. We were sitting together, scrolling on our phones. I laughed at something I saw. She immediately asked, "What's funny?" I told her it was just a video. She held out her hand and said, "Let me see." And when I hesitated, just for a second, her entire mood changed. She went silent, cold. That familiar tension filled the room. And I remember thinking, why am I scared right now? That thought scared me more than anything else. Later that night, I tried to talk to her about it. I told her I felt like I didn't have privacy anymore, that I felt constantly monitored. She stared at me and said, "Well, if you didn't have anything to hide, it wouldn't be a problem." That sentence stuck with me, because it sounded logical on the surface, but deep down it felt wrong. Even then, I didn't leave. I told myself she'd change, that things would calm down, that every relationship has rough patches. The truth? I was terrified of starting over. The breakup didn't happen all at once. It happened in pieces. More arguments, more silence, more walking on eggshells, until one day she accused me of emotionally distancing myself. And for the first time, she was right. Because somewhere along the way, I checked out. The final conversation was oddly calm. No yelling, no tears. She told me she felt like I wasn't trying anymore. And I realized I was tired of trying to convince someone I wasn't the enemy. So I told her I thought we should end it. She didn't argue. She just nodded and said, okay. That hurt more than I expected. The first few weeks after the breakup were rough. The silence was loud, my phone felt heavier, the nights felt longer, and more than once I almost texted her, not because I missed the relationship, but because I missed not being alone. But then something started to change. I slept better. I laughed more easily. I stopped second-guessing every little thing I said. And I realized how tense I'd been for so long that peace felt unfamiliar. Looking back now, I see all the red flags clearly. The control, the guilt, the way my needs always came last. And I don't blame her for everything. I blame myself for staying when I knew better. I learned something important from all of this. Loneliness can make you accept things you'd never tolerate otherwise. It can convince you that discomfort is better than emptiness, but it's not. Being alone is quiet. Being with the wrong person is loud in ways you don't notice until you leave. So, yeah, I ignored the red flags. I made excuses. I stayed longer than I should have. Not because I loved her more than myself, but because I was afraid of being alone. And I won't make that mistake again.
I still don't know why I lied in the first place. That's the part that messes with me the most. It wasn't to hurt anyone. It wasn't for money. It wasn't even that serious at the start. It was just easier than telling the truth. And yeah, I know how that sounds, because every story that starts like that ends the same way. This is one of those stories. So here it is. This all started about a year ago, and at the time, my life felt stuck. Not bad, just stagnant. Same routine, same work stress, same conversations. And I was tired of feeling like the most boring person in the room. I was hanging out with a new group of people I'd met through a friend. Nothing crazy, just casual hangouts, getting to know each other. One night, someone asked what I did for work. Simple question. I answered honestly at first, and then someone else joked, "Man, that sounds kinda chill, must pay decent." And instead of saying, not really, I laughed and said, "Yeah, it's not bad." Pause. That was the lie, that tiny sentence, because it didn't actually pay well. I was barely getting by, but in that moment, I wanted to feel impressive, just for once. Short pause. Nobody questioned it, nobody cared, and I should have let it end there, but I didn't. Over the next few weeks, little things kept coming up. What area do you live in? Do you like your job? Are you saving up for anything? And every time, I slightly exaggerated. Not massively, just enough to sound more put together. A better apartment, more flexibility, less stress than I actually had. Each lie felt small on its own. Together, they were building something I couldn't control. Long pause. Here's the thing about lying. It doesn't feel wrong at first. It feels convenient. And when people respond positively, it almost feels justified. They treated me differently, listened more, respected me more, and that messed with my head. Beat? There was one person in that group I got especially close to. I'll call her Sarah. She was smart, funny, and genuinely easy to talk to. And yeah, I liked her. A lot. Which is where things really went downhill. Because now it wasn't just casual exaggeration anymore. Now I was trying to live up to a version of myself that didn't exist. I'd talk about future plans I wasn't sure I could afford, trips I wanted to take, goals that sounded good out loud, and she believed me. That's the part that makes me feel sick. Long pause. At some point, she asked to come over, and I froze, because my place didn't match the image I'd painted. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't what I'd implied. So I said my place was under renovation. Quiet pause. Yeah, that was lie number, I don't even know anymore. She didn't question it, just laughed and said, "That's annoying," and I nodded like it was normal. Beat. From there, the lies got more creative. If I couldn't meet, it was because of work. If I was stressed, it was deadlines. If I avoided certain topics, I changed the subject. And the entire time, there was this low-level anxiety in my chest, like I was constantly one question away from being exposed. The worst part? I started believing my own version of events. I talked about things so confidently that it almost felt real. And when reality didn't match, I got irritated. At myself, at situations, at everyone. There was one night that stands out more than any other. We were all hanging out and someone made a joke about money. Nothing serious. And Sarah laughed and said, "Yeah, he's doing fine. He's got his life together." She said it casually, like it was obvious. And my stomach dropped, because hearing someone else say it made it feel real and false at the same time. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about how far this had gone, how many details I'd need to remember, how many stories I'd already told. And instead of stopping, I doubled down, which is probably the worst thing you can do. A few weeks later, everything collapsed. Sarah mentioned wanting to visit my place again. I panicked. I made up another excuse. She didn't get upset, but she got quiet, and I could tell something shifted. A couple days later, she asked me directly, "Can I ask you something without you getting defensive?" That sentence alone made my heart race. I said yes. She asked why my stories didn't always add up, why my schedule kept changing, why things felt off. And in that moment, I had two choices: tell the truth or lie again. I lied. Not even well. I stumbled, over-explained, said too much. And she just stared at me. No anger, no yelling, just disappointment. She told me she didn't care how much money I made, or where I lived, or how impressive my job was. She cared that I wasn't honest, and that hurt more than anything. She left shortly after. No drama, just said she needed space. And the silence afterward was unbearable. Word spread faster than I expected. Not aggressively, just quietly. People stopped inviting me out. Conversations felt shorter, energy changed. Nobody confronted me. They didn't need to. I knew. I spent a lot of time alone after that, replaying everything, trying to pinpoint where I could have stopped it. And the answer was painfully simple. The first lie. I wanted to be liked so badly that I forgot to be real. And in the end, I lost the thing I was trying to protect. A few months later, Sarah reached out, not to reconnect, just to check in. She said she hoped I was doing okay. That was it. No accusations, no lectures. And somehow, that kindness hurt more than anger would have. Because it reminded me that I didn't lose her because of my situation. I lost her because of my choices. I've been honest ever since, almost painfully so. And yeah, sometimes I feel boring again, but I also feel lighter because I don't have to remember who I pretended to be. If there's one thing I learned from this, it's that small lies don't stay small. They grow quietly,
And by the time you notice, they're already controlling you. So yeah, this all started as a small lie, and it got completely out of control.
I used to think that if I could just explain myself better, people would understand. Like, if I said the right words, if I stayed calm enough, if I didn't get emotional, everything would work itself out. Turns out, that's not always true. And that realization cost me more relationships than I expected. So yeah, AITA for choosing my peace over explaining myself. This isn't about one person, it's about a pattern. Friends, family, coworkers. Any situation where I felt like I was constantly defending my decisions just to keep the peace. I'm the kind of person who hates conflict. Not in a dramatic way, I just don't like tension. I don't like raised voices. I don't like feeling misunderstood. So for most of my life, I explained everything. Why I couldn't show up, why I needed space, why I felt a certain way, even when I didn't owe anyone an explanation. At first, it felt mature, like I was being emotionally responsible. But slowly, it started draining me. There was one friend in particular, I'll call her Maya. Maya and I were close. Not romantically, just one of those friendships where you talk almost every day. She had strong opinions about everything. And at first, I admired that. She knew what she wanted. She spoke her mind. She didn't sugarcoat things. But over time, her opinions started feeling less like opinions and more like expectations. If I made a decision she didn't agree with, she'd question it. Not aggressively, just constantly. Why would you do it that way? Don't you think that's a bad idea? I wouldn't have done that. And I'd explain. Every time. Why I took a certain job, why I didn't want to go out that night, why I needed alone time. And she'd listen, but she wouldn't accept it. She'd counter, offer alternatives, tell me what she thought was better. And somehow I always ended up feeling like I needed her approval. It got worse when I started prioritizing myself more, saying no, canceling plans, taking breaks from social stuff, normal things. But every no turned into a conversation, a debate, a mini interrogation. And if I didn't explain enough, she'd say things like, "I just don't understand you lately," or "You're changing," which sounds harmless until you hear it enough times. I started over-explaining everything. Long messages, voice notes, clarifications, trying to make my choices sound reasonable, acceptable. And the crazy part? The more I explained, the less peace I had. One night after a long week, I canceled plans. I was exhausted, mentally fried, just needed to be alone. I sent a simple message. "Hey, I'm going to stay in tonight." That's it. She replied with a paragraph, asking if something was wrong, if I was mad at her, if she did something. I told her no, that I was just tired. She asked tired how? Work tired, social tired, emotional tired? And that's when I felt it, that familiar tightness in my chest. Why did I have to justify rest? Why did "I'm tired" not feel like enough? I explained anyway, because that's what I always did. And afterward, I felt worse. The breaking point came a few weeks later. I made a decision that she strongly disagreed with. Not harmful, not reckless, just different from what she would have done. And she went in, questioned my judgment, my priorities, my mindset. And instead of explaining, I went quiet. I told her calmly, "I don't really want to get into it." She didn't like that. She said, "That feels unfair." And something in me just snapped. Not angrily, just clearly. I said, "I don't owe explanations for choices that don't affect you." The silence that followed was heavy. Beta told me that I was shutting her out, that I was being distant, that it felt like I didn't care anymore. And for the first time, I didn't rush to defend myself. I just listened. Later that night, I thought about how often I felt anxious before replying to her, how often I rehearsed messages, how often I worried about how my choices would be received. And I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't choosing peace. I was choosing approval.
So I stopped explaining. Not dramatically, just gradually. Shorter responses, clear boundaries, no essays. And predictably, people noticed. Some respected it, some didn't. Beta didn't. She accused me of pulling away, of being cold, of changing for the worse. And maybe I did change, but for the first time, it felt like growth. Eventually, the friendship faded. No blow up, no argument, just distance. And yeah, it hurt, but it also felt quiet, in a good way. Here's what I learned. People who respect you don't require constant explanations. They trust you. They accept no without needing reasons. They don't punish you for choosing yourself. And people who need explanations, sometimes they're not looking to understand. They're looking to control. Sometimes I explain myself sometimes. I'm not heartless. But now I ask myself one question first. Is this explanation for clarity or for permission? Because those are very different things. So yeah, I chose my peace. I stopped defending every choice, stopped justifying my boundaries, stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. And I lost some people, but I found myself. So tell me, am I the AITA for choosing my peace over explaining myself? Or is that just part of growing up?